Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Hello friends, in today's talk we will be dealing with music essentially, but we will also be dealing with sounds. Until now we have covered presentation and different dimensions of presentation skills, especially the visual dimension of presentation skills, but it is also important to identify the last component which may or may not get very reflected, but which I have a feeling would take you a long way, where you are making presentations in your absence, or where you are extending your soft skills to other areas, such as let us say a party which you are giving, or maybe an inaugural program, or maybe a particular let us say how do I put it, let us say a particular shopping complex, or what is being played over there. For instance, if you walk into a big shopping complex, you will find that some music, soft music is playing over there. You may or may not be aware of it, but it creates a certain kind of an ambience. Or you walk into a hotel or a restaurant and you find a certain kind of music over there. It is a very common experience if you go to some of the brands like let us say Pizza Hut or Domino's, or something like Subways, where in many cases you will find music playing. So, music does play a very significant role in the context of ambience. Sound plays a very significant role in the way we perceive things and we understand things. So, today's focus begins with the necessity or the relevance of sound to begin with in the context of presentations, but later on we move on to music as a communicating channel by itself and explore it a little further, because I am sure that after I have completed, some of you might feel that it can be exploited in an interesting way. See, one of the things is that when you do something which is unique, which is different, as you will get to learn when you complete the lessons or the talks, cover the talks on creativity, uniqueness is something which is cherished, which is relished, which is understood and appreciated, and it helps influence other people. So, music is something which might help you in that direction as well. So, giving you this background, let me quickly give you an overview of what we are going to look at. We will look at auditory perception very quickly, music, its key elements, music perception, the role of noise and music in our lives, music in multimedia, music in cognition, emotion and therapy, use of music and sounds in social contexts, and with that we will complete this relatively brief exploration of this particular area. Auditory perception, if you are looking at the mechanism involved, the ability to hear sounds by detecting vibrations. You have the ear which generates a nerve impulse, and this is processed by the primary auditory cortex in the temporal side of the brain. Sounds generally make us think of a sound source. So, after the technicality, we need to understand how we generally look at sound, how do we generally explore sound. When you smell something, you have a feeling that the smell is associated with a source. When you hear something, you are generally thinking of not the sound by itself, but you are usually closing your eyes and trying to identify the source. For instance, let us say that I make a tapping noise, okay, and you are trying to immediately associate it with, let us say, my touching the table with a pen, or if I make a noise like this, which you can faintly hear, you will immediately try to identify from which particular place this particular noise is coming. Source location, the tendency to search for the source, is a very interesting aspect of the way we perceive sound. Perception of sound is also has two other components, spatiality and temporality. it provides information about space. The sound can be coming from all sides, let us say roaring of the sea coming from a broad set of areas, or a voice which is coming from a specific direction. You have the tendency of filtering sounds. You might find that a group of mothers are talking and chatting and the children are playing. One child starts crying and one mother gets up. Among so many children shouting and crying, she is able to pick up that particular sound and able to identify that as the sound which is relevant to her. So, filtering the various things we talked about in the context of visual perception will be relevant here also. Provides information about space, as I told you, and sounds and color are also very closely linked. Not just sounds and colors. When we are talking about music, music has a variety of wide associations which relate to colors, which relate to images. Okay. Let us say that the moment I play a certain thing, you will say that okay, this happens to be devotional music. In fact, we did such studies and we found that most of the people, when they associated a kind of music with devotionality, came up with images of temples, of prayers, of lamps being or worship and various other things. So, music very strongly evokes visual images as well. Okay. So, this is another different aspect, another significant aspect of music, which you find being distinctively used in the context of advertisements, because in advertisements people very carefully select the kind of background scores that are being used, because they kind of create an ambience for it. Let me give you an example. Let us say that you have an advertisement for, let us say, a product of incense sticks for puja. Imagine that soft piano is playing behind it. Would that be acceptable to you? Or imagine a situation where you have a product like let us say perfume, Axe perfume, and behind that Bismillah Khan's Sahnai is playing. So, you understand that this is very important. Now, if these things happen, then you suddenly realize that something has gone wrong. Until this happens, you accept it. So, the very fact that certain musical pieces or certain musical approaches are compatible with certain things is something which you have taken for granted. The reason for having this particular lecture is to make you aware of the fact that these are all placed very carefully by people who know what they are doing. And if you are to make a presentation which is multimedia, which is going to make use of music, then this is something which is going to be very significant. Certain aspects of music. Music is a cultural activity, very significant aspect of our culture. The moment you listen to music, you can say that whether it is an Indian music, Western music, within Indian music, whether it is a popular music, whether it is a music for youth, whether it is music, traditional music for older generation, so on and so forth. Music is associated with different seasons, different periods of the day and night, and you find different festivals have different kinds of music. For instance, during New Year a certain kind of music is played, but during let us say Durga Puja a certain other kind of music is played. So, music is something which is pervasive within our cultural context, and the majority of the youth culture is fond of listening to music, not for itself, but while doing something else, like driving, like going off to dozing off or relaxing, or maybe even doing studies, whatever it is. Now, sound and silence of course are very important in our lives, and sound and silence are something which together decide whether something can be called music or can be called noise. If you have rhythmic sound, if your sound has certain features, it has certain kinds of pauses, then you can think in terms of it being musical, because it has certain components, certain features, now attributes which are emerging, like a certain periodicity, like something like this has a certain periodicity, but this periodicity can be also associated with the driving of a nail by a carpenter. But along with that, it can be more complex, in which case you will find that it has something which approaches rhythm as in music, but if some certain notes are associated with that, gradually it evolves moves in the direction of either a successful or failed music. Music traditionally has been found to be very influential, because you see that if we take the example of from our own tradition of Vishwamitra, Rishi Vishwamitra, or the Saint Vishwamitra, then you find that he is very strongly meditating and cannot be distracted. Now, how is it that the Apsaras of heaven will be able to distract him if they are to be successful? They might dance, but dance is something which apparently is not audible, although you can hear the footsteps, and that would not be good enough to disturb somebody's deep concentration. It has to be broken with something else, which is much more, let us say, seductive, much more persuasive, much more powerful: music. So, you have the concept of ethereal music, music of the devas, music of the gods. So, even if you are looking at tradition, you have this. On the other hand, music is supposed to have this as source elemental sound, or om, which goes to unheard of sound, or sound which is unheard, to the root of nada, which happens to be the source of all that is audible, including our speech as well as music. So, if you are looking at the Western context, on the other hand, music is something which has various dramatic qualities, like conversational qualities. One instrument is playing, the other instrument is responding to that. They are two playing simultaneously, which is polyphony. So, where you see that if you are looking at opera, if you are looking at different kinds of symphonies, okay, then you find that lot of musical let us say instruments are playing together, or they are conversing amongst one another, and these are other dimensions of music, where you see that the entire process of socialization is metaphorically presented through this particular kind of a strategy across a particular period of time, both through simultaneity as well as discreteness, both across specific moments in time as well as in terms of sequence where one responds to the other. If you are looking at the Indian traditional context, which is something which is relevant for us, obviously, we start off with Ahatanada to Anahatanada. Anahatanada is that which is unmanifested sound, the root of all sounds, okay, and from that cosmic source is manifested sound, music, the principle of speech and the world. In fact, we say that from the word emerged, from music, from sound, world emerged. And you see that as an aesthetic experience in the Indian context, you start off with music, and as you go deeper into Indian classical music, you become more contemplative and reach a state of bliss. The reason for talking about this is because this associates music with the concept of emotions and of an aesthetic emotion, and emotion and music are very significantly linked and have relevance in the socio-cultural context of advertising, persuading people in different ways as well. And you see that when you develop a knowledge or a realization of how music works, you are able to make effective use of it. So, you see that you experience music and then you know how that experience actually happens, then you are able to use music in a more meaningful way. So, we will talk at a very basic level about some of these things. We will do a set of surveys with you, where we will share, we are going just now, you can do those surveys. We are sharing certain aspects of music with you, and together we will learn a few other things about music as well. Now, if you are looking at some of the basic components of music, one of them would be pitch and melody. What is pitch? It is the highness or the lowness of a note, the frequency of notes. We very often talk about sa, re, ga, ma and things like that. I will also play one in a moment from now when I discuss timbre with you. So, that is the aspect we are talking about. A sequence of notes of different pitches presented in a systematic manner, in an organized manner, where there are clusters of relationships or repetitions, can be considered a melody. These are often mathematically or graphically represented. These happen to be the key ingredients of musical song, musical pieces, when they are combined with certain durations, pauses and rhythm. So, we have a basic working definition of what music is. We talk about harmony. Harmony is where something is tolerable, something is something we can hear. Now, there are complex theories of harmonies, but we will not go into that. And an aesthetic category can be understood in the context of visuals as well. Certain colors are compatible, certain colors are not. Pitches played at the same time, which is very often known as chords, like you have chords like major chords, minor chords when you play the guitar, okay, and these generate harmonies when either played simultaneously, a number of chords played together, or sorry, a number of notes played together to form a chord, or if the sequence of those notes of which the chord consists are played in that particular sequence, they also give rise to a sense of harmony. Now, these harmonious chords, major chords generally are positive sounding or convey a sense of joy and happiness. Minor chords very often convey a sense of a little bit of sadness, and this is something which has almost been identified universally. Rhythm is something which we talked about when we talked about equal gaps, as in let us say tabla or drums, also something which we very often found in visuals. And I will give an example towards the end of how rhythm in music and visuals are associated. Arrangement of sound and silence alternately in certain manners, that is sound of the particular instrument as opposed to the silence of that particular instrument, while other instruments or other voices are playing along. So, that is another thing. A musical piece can have its rhythm, when notes and the gaps between notes can have that rhythm, and it can be accompanied by also rhythm as with a tabla. So, somebody is singing a song and somebody is playing the tabla. The song has its own rhythm, but the tabla has a more periodic definite rhythm, periodicity of sounds. Now, timbre is something which is where I will, when I discuss this and give you an example, I will be able to share with you how notes are played in sequence. Timbre is the quality or the voice of an instrument. Let us say, why is it that Kishore Kumar was so popular and maybe X, Y and Z were not so very popular? Both of them played the notes correctly. That is because the voice has a specific quality. The moment you hear that voice, you know that it is Kishore Kumar's voice, or the moment you hear the sound of a particular instrument, you know which particular instrument is playing, in spite of the fact that let us say both the instruments are playing the same notes, they sound different. We will not go into the technicalities, but we will simply say that although the central frequency is the same, there are other associated frequencies which are different for different instruments, and this gives rise to the typical vibration compound which we perceive as the specific quality of that particular instrument of voice. Now, what I am going to do right now is quickly take you to an example of timbre. I am playing an instrument over here right now. And you can hear another instrument over here. Now, they are playing the same set of notes, and this also tells us about the notes like sa, re, ga, ma, pa, dha, ni, sa, and you find that this is where we were talking about pitch, notes of lesser frequency and notes of higher frequency. So, what you find over here is that these manage to communicate different things. The first one was santur and the second one was violin. So, they have differences which are easily perceptible. Music and perception. Now, you see that music perception, the way we understand, perceive music depends on culture and meaning, how we associate that particular music in which particular cultural context. Let us say, for instance, I have a lot of difficulty when you see that bhajans are played to the old film songs tunes, because sometimes old bhajans are these days, some people convert it into or play it along the melodies or the tunes of film songs. It is jarring because of a particular cultural association that this is a film song's tune and that is being used for playing a bhajan or singing a bhajan. Culture is related it is related to music perception, is related to culture, it is related to emotions, as I told you a little earlier. because they distinctively manage to communicate positive or negative emotions, and they obviously have specific contexts. I have explained the context when I talked about advertising and music, and when we talk about the multimedia context, for instance, I can tell you that there can be sounds which are distracting, there can be sounds which are compatible. If you are looking at our mobile phones, why is it that you pick up your own, let us say, ringtones? Why is it that ringtones of specific kinds are soothing, whereas certain other ringtones are very, very irritating? So, these choices and guessing which one would be, let us say, appealing for the majority of the people is something which is very, very important. For instance, these companies, when they provide you with a preset of ringtones, actually have tested it a lot on audiences, groups of different clusters of audiences on audience, and have identified that these are the most popular, these are the most effective, these cover the wide range of people and their likes and dislikes, and hence these will be successful. Sound is also associated with, let us say, getting a message, sending a message and all things. So, it triggers certain kinds of information associated behavior, a particular sound conveying or particular note conveying that message has come, a particular note conveying that a message has gone, and so on and so forth. So, these are relevant in the context of music perception. Music in our lives, as I told you, I have already hopefully managed to convince you that we listen to music because it is a very important part of our lives, for the sake of enjoyment, for relaxation, but also, as I have probably been able to share with you, in the context of multimedia presentations as well as various kinds of business contexts, including advertisement as well as ambience. Now, if you are talking about music and multimedia, ringtones and other information, I have given you the example, interaction sounds, role in the intensification and dramatization of things. Let us say that if you are watching a movie, as the action quickens, you find that the drum beats are quickening. So, for dramatization, and I will give you an example a little later of how music manages to convey something which ordinarily would not be conveyed very, very powerfully. For example, here I take an example of a poem by Edna St. Vincent Millay, and you find that here is the fragment of the poem which I will read out to you, and then I will share it with you. But sure, the sky is big, I said, miles and miles above my head. So, here upon my back I will lie and look my fill into the sky. And I looked, and after all, the sky was not so very tall. The sky, I said, must somewhere stop, and sure enough I see the top. The sky, I thought, is not so grand. I almost could touch it with my hand, and reaching up my hand to try, I screamed to feel it touch the sky. I screamed, and lo, infinity came down and settled over me, forced back my scream into my chest, bent back my arm upon my breast, and pressing of the undefined, the definition of on my mind. Now, what is basically being told is of an experience of a person looking at the sky and considering it ordinary, and then suddenly realizing that it is extraordinary. Now, this is something which you will find having been covered when we dealt with text animations earlier, but when music is accompanied to that, what kind of a significant difference does it make is something which we will try to identify right now. So, I believe that that makes it very clear how distinctively different the experience is when music is attached to that. Earlier you identified how the experience was very distinctive when texts get animated, but add music to that and the experience is absolutely different. So, music has a lot of role to play in the context of emotions and therapy. These are some of the features which I will just quickly share with you. Speed or pace of music very often communicates happiness, excitement, angers when it is fast, and when it is slow, sadness and serenity. We will just look at a couple of demonstrations of this, and you see that we talked about major scale, major tones, major chords, happiness, minor chords, sadness, loudness and intensity, melody where something is being complemented, harmonies simultaneously, two things happening, rhythm, the regularity of pattern of beats. So, before we move on to some of the other things, what I would like to share with you are a few clips which illustrate some of these points, certain clips which we have been working with, and where we have found that there are certain relevance in the context of research as well as in the context of what we are learning in the context in communication and in soft skills. Now, what I will try to start off with is a track from Pandit Hariprasad Chaurasia, where you will find that in two different places the kind of emotion conveyed will change. You will find that at this point of time the element of sadness is fairly distinctive. On the other hand, we pause and we move towards the end, and you find that the meaning of the music is very different, although the notes are similar and are being played in a similar manner because of the speed of the tempo. So, you see that tempo changes the meaning of things, as I said with you, and you find that Indian music is capable of conveying both happy as well as sad emotions. For instance, if you are looking at this, you find that it manages to communicate emotions of happiness, of romance. That is what our studies have identified, whereas the same set of notes communicate something entirely different without the acoustic dimension, without the rhythm, and when there is a certain amount of slowness to the particular thing. So, happy, sad, more happy, less happy, romantic, so on and so forth. So, the meanings keep on changing. So, what I wanted to share with you friends is that these examples which I will quickly share with you, the last few points, that music is something which dominantly in the Indian context, we did a survey with more than 1000 people, and we found that it is dominantly calm, communicating a sense of calmness or mild kind of sadness accompanied by calmness, and these can have very distinctive therapeutic implications. They can also have cultural implications, as we discussed, and in general we find that music which follows one another, let us say that if I am listening to happy music and then I listen to sad music seems to be much more sad. Music is also linked to colors, okay, and this is something which I will quickly share with you. You find that in a study where we wanted people to associate music with the other dimension, which is the visual dimension, we found that these particular clips were associated, these images were associated with particular kinds of musical clips. Romantic musical clips were associated with this image without romantic being written below it. sad music clips were associated with this, tranquil and peaceful were associated with this particular image. In the same way, speed was communicated through these graphic representations. So, people also picked up these accordingly, and the complexity of the rhythm and the total musical piece was also rated accordingly. Now, what this tells us is that we are able to relate at some level music with visuals, music with colors, and this is very, very important for us, because when we have them in contrast, they create a different kind of a meaning. When we have them together, they create an entirely different kind of meaning, and these can have various interesting implications as we try to apply them to our presentation contexts and to various ambiances where music can heighten perception, heighten the effect of good communication as well as manipulate people. For instance, it was a study found that in a particular shop, when they started using a particular kind of music, the sale of that particular shop increased significantly, because this music conveyed a particular cultural value to the group of people. So, these people got attracted to this particular shop and then started buying from there. I hope that this session has been interesting, slightly different, slightly of a different nature, not immediately linkable to soft skills, but I had a feeling that you can make use of it in a meaningful way. Thank you very much.